"Do you like eating me?" the black cook asked, her voice cutting through the smoky kitchen air as the rancher stepped forward to kiss her neck, flames from the stove casting shadows across their forbidden moment. The townsfolk whisper she's getting above her station, that no kitchen servant should cook with such artistry. They predict she'll be run out of town for her pride, destined to scrub floors in some distant city. But the weathered rancher sees something they cannot, a brilliance that could either elevate them both or destroy everything he's built. What none of them know is that a stranger rides toward their small frontier settlement, carrying news that will shatter every assumption about the woman they dismiss as just another cook. Will her hidden legacy become her salvation, or will the truth ignite a fire that consumes them all? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The pre-dawn darkness hung heavy over Copper Ridge as Celeste Dupre struck a match against the kitchen wall. The flame danced to life, illuminating her determined face as she lit the wood stove. Steam rose from the cast-iron pots as she began her morning ritual, transforming simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Outside the kitchen window, she could see the ranch hands stirring in the bunkhouse. The Hargrave Ranch sprawled across the Arizona territory like a testament to frontier ambition. Cattle dotted the distant hills, and the main house stood proud against the morning sky. This place had been her world for 3 years, yet she remained an outsider looking in. The bacon sizzled as Celeste arranged it in perfect rows. Her movements held precision that spoke of training far beyond what anyone expected from a ranch cook. She folded eggs into delicate omelets, adding herbs she grew in her private garden behind the kitchen. Each plate became a canvas for her artistry. The kitchen door creaked open. Tom Bradley, the deputy sheriff, stepped inside with his usual nervous energy. His badge caught the lamplight as he removed his hat. "Morning, Miss Dupree. Smells like heaven in here." Celeste nodded curtly. Bradley had been visiting more frequently lately, always with compliments about her cooking. Something about his attention felt different from the usual ranch hand banter. His eyes held an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Just doing my job, deputy." Bradley lingered, watching her work with unusual focus. He pulled out a small notebook and scribbled something quickly before tucking it away. The gesture struck Celeste as odd, but she had learned not to question the strange habits of frontier men. The main dining room filled with the sound of heavy boots and rough voices. Eli Hargrave entered the kitchen, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere. At 32, he carried the weight of inherited responsibility on his broad shoulders. His father had built this ranch from nothing, and now Eli struggled to maintain that legacy. "The usual for everyone?" Eli studied her face. Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary. He had noticed the subtle improvements she made to every meal, the way she elevated simple fare into something memorable. More importantly, he had noticed the loneliness that shadowed her movements. "Make it special today. We have buyers coming from Phoenix." Celeste felt a familiar frustration rising. Special meant her best work would be appreciated by strangers who would never know her name. She was the invisible hand behind every successful meal, every impressed guest, every business deal sealed over perfectly prepared food. The morning passed in a blur of service and cleanup. As the ranch hands filed out for their daily work, snippets of conversation drifted back to the kitchen. "She thinks she's too good for regular cooking. Puts on airs with all them fancy touches. Eli should find himself a normal cook who knows her place." The words stung because they carried a grain of truth. Celeste did aspire to more than serving meals to ungrateful ranch hands. She dreamed of a kitchen where her skills would be celebrated, not whispered about with suspicion. By afternoon, the heat had become oppressive. Celeste worked on dinner preparations, her cotton dress sticking to her skin as she stirred sauces and seasoned meats. The sound of approaching horses broke her concentration. Through the window, she watched Marshal Ambrose Kane dismount his horse with the confidence of a man accustomed to authority. His silver badge gleamed against his black vest, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who saw the world in terms of order and control. Kane's voice carried through the open windows as he spoke with Eli near the corral. "You need to think about the example you're setting, Hargrave. Other ranchers are talking. Letting hired help get above their station causes problems for everyone. Eli's response came too quietly for Celeste to hear, but she could read the tension in his posture. Kane's visit was not social. The marshal had made his position clear on multiple occasions. The frontier had its natural hierarchy, and challenges to that order threatened everyone's stability. As evening approached, Celeste found herself alone in the kitchen with her doubts. The elaborate dinner she had planned seemed suddenly pointless. Why put her heart into work that would only generate more criticism? Why continue striving for excellence when mediocrity would cause less trouble? The kitchen door opened softly. Eli entered, his hat in his hands. The ranch had grown quiet as workers settled in for the evening. Only the crickets and distant cattle provided a soundtrack to their solitude. "You heard Kane." It was not a question. Celeste continued her work without looking up, dicing vegetables with mechanical precision. The blade moved rhythmically against the wooden cutting board, each strike releasing her frustration. "Do you like eating me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with double meaning. She was asking about her cooking, but the words carried deeper implications about acceptance, appreciation, and desire. Eli stepped forward, drawn by something he could not name. The scent of her perfume mixed with kitchen spices created an intoxicating combination. His hand reached toward her neck, drawn by an impulse that defied social convention. The moment shattered as boots thundered across the front porch. A stranger's voice called out, urgent and excited. "Anyone home?" "I have extraordinary news for Miss Celeste Dupré." The stranger who burst through the kitchen door wore a fine wool coat despite the desert heat. His polished boots and refined manner marked him as someone from far beyond the Arizona territory. Dust covered his clothes from hard travel, but his eyes held the excitement of a man bearing momentous news. "Charles Whitmore, food critic for the San Francisco Chronicle." He removed his hat with a flourish. "I've ridden 3 days to find you, Miss Dupré." Celeste stepped back instinctively. Eli moved closer, his hand resting protectively near her shoulder. Neither had expected their private moment to shatter so dramatically, and the stranger's urgent energy filled the kitchen with tension. Whitmore's gaze swept across the dinner preparations. Steam rose from perfectly seasoned roasts. Delicate sauces simmered in copper pots. The aroma that had drawn him from the main road now held his complete attention. "May I?" Without waiting for permission, he sampled the sauce with a clean spoon. His expression transformed from polite interest to genuine amazement. He closed his eyes, savoring flavors that spoke of training far beyond what any frontier cook should possess. Remarkable. Classical French technique with Southern innovation. Where did you learn to cook like this? Heat flooded Celeste's cheeks. No one had ever asked about her training with genuine curiosity. The ranch hands simply expected their meals. Eli appreciated her work, but never questioned its origins. This stranger spoke to her as if she were an artist worthy of respect. "My grandmother taught me before she passed. She must have been extraordinary." Whitmore pulled out official-looking documents from his leather satchel. "Miss Dupré, I bring news that will change your life completely." The papers crackled as he unfolded them. Legal seals and elegant handwriting covered the expensive parchment. Celeste had never seen documents so formal, so important-looking. "Your great-aunt, Marguerite Dubois, passed away last month in San Francisco. She owned Maison Dubois, the most prestigious restaurant on the West Coast." Eli's hand found the small of Celeste's back as her knees threatened to buckle. She had no memory of any great-aunt, no knowledge of family beyond her grandmother's stories. The idea that someone related to her had achieved such success seemed impossible. "She left everything to you." The restaurant, the building, all her recipes and equipment. Whitmore spread additional papers across the kitchen table. Property deeds, bank statements, and detailed inventories painted a picture of wealth beyond Celeste's wildest dreams. The restaurant generated more income in a month than she earned in 3 years at the ranch. "There are conditions. You must claim your inheritance within 30 days. You must pass a culinary examination administered by the San Francisco Restaurant Association, and you must prove your identity through cooking demonstration. The room spun around Celeste as the magnitude of this revelation sank in. Freedom lay within her grasp, but the price demanded everything she had ever known. Leaving meant abandoning the only stability she had found since her grandmother's death. Why me? I never heard of any great aunt. Your grandmother and Marguerite were estranged for decades, some family dispute that kept them apart, but Marguerite never forgot her roots. She spent years searching for surviving family members. Eli's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. Losing Celeste would devastate him personally, but her departure would also eliminate the one element that made his struggling ranch special. Buyers came specifically for her meals. Her cooking had become his competitive advantage. What happens if she fails the examination? The restaurant passes to the city of San Francisco. Miss Dupré returns to her current life. The weight of that possibility pressed down on Celeste like a physical burden. Failure would mean returning in shame, marked forever as someone who had reached for something beyond her station and fallen short. The gossips would never let her forget such a spectacular collapse. Outside, the sound of approaching horses interrupted her racing thoughts. Marshal Kane's voice carried across the yard as he spoke with arriving ranch hands. His timing felt ominous, as if the universe conspired to complicate her moment of revelation. I need time to consider this. Whitmore checked his pocket watch with obvious impatience. I must return to San Francisco tomorrow. The legal deadlines cannot be extended. The kitchen door opened without ceremony. Kane stepped inside, his authority preceding him like a cold wind, his eyes immediately fixed on the stranger's fine clothes and the scattered legal documents. Everything all right here, Hargrave? Tension crackled between the three men as territorial instincts flared. Kane represented local authority threatened by outside influence. Whitmore embodied opportunity that could disrupt established order. Eli stood caught between loyalty to his community and devotion to Celeste. Just business, Marshal. Kane's gaze shifted to Celeste with unconcealed suspicion. He had spent years maintaining careful balance in Copper Ridge, ensuring everyone understood their proper place. The presence of expensive lawyers and official documents suggested changes he could not control. What kind of business requires legal papers in my jurisdiction? Celeste felt the familiar weight of being scrutinized, judged, and found wanting. Kane's question carried implications beyond simple curiosity. He was establishing his authority, reminding everyone present that he controlled what happened in his territory. The three men waited for her response, each representing a different path forward. Whitmore offered unprecedented opportunity tinged with enormous risk. Kane embodied the status quo that kept her safe but limited. Eli represented something more complex, a connection that transcended their circumstances. Her decision would reshape not only her own future, but the delicate balance that governed all their lives. Kane's boots scraped against the wooden floor as he moved closer to the table covered with legal documents. His weathered hands picked up the papers without permission, scanning the formal language with growing displeasure. The inheritance details painted a picture that threatened everything he believed about proper social order. San Francisco restaurant owner. His voice carried mockery and disbelief in equal measure. Mighty convenient timing for such good fortune. Whitmore straightened his shoulders, clearly unaccustomed to having his professional integrity questioned by frontier law enforcement. The tension between the two men filled the kitchen like smoke from an overheated stove. The documentation is completely legitimate, Marshal. I represent the San Francisco legal firm handling the estate. Papers can say anything? Kane dropped the documents back onto the table with deliberate carelessness. Seen plenty of schemes dressed up in fancy legal language. Heat rushed through Celeste's chest at the implied accusation. Kane was suggesting she had somehow orchestrated this elaborate deception, as if she possessed the connections and resources to fool legal authorities across multiple states. Word of the stranger's arrival spread through the ranch with the speed of wildfire. Ranch hands gathered outside the kitchen windows, their curiosity overcoming usual evening routines. Whispered conversations buzzed with speculation about the well-dressed visitor and his mysterious business. By morning, half the town had heard distorted versions of the story. Kane made sure his interpretation reached the right ears first. He positioned himself at the general store, the saloon, and the church steps, sharing his suspicions with anyone willing to listen. Mighty suspicious how good fortune finds some people right when they need it most. The implications spread like poison through the community. Celeste had always been different, too educated, too skilled for her station. Now those differences transformed from mere curiosities into evidence of deeper deception. 3 days later, the hostility became impossible to ignore. The mercantile owner refused to sell Celeste fresh vegetables, claiming his stock was reserved for other customers. The butcher turned her away without explanation. Even children pointed and whispered when she walked the dusty streets. Eli watched the persecution with growing anger, but his public silence spoke volumes. He defended Celeste in private conversations but avoided confronting Kane directly. His hesitation felt like betrayal, another reminder that she stood alone against mounting opposition. The breaking point arrived on Saturday evening. Celeste had planned an elaborate dinner to demonstrate her capabilities for Whitmore, who had extended his stay to witness her skills firsthand. She needed this meal to be perfect, her audition for a future beyond Copper Ridge. Every ingredient told a story of struggle. She had traveled 20 miles to find acceptable vegetables from a farmer who knew nothing of the town's boycott. The spices came from her carefully hoarded personal collection. Even basic staples like flour and salt had required creative solutions. The kitchen became her sanctuary and her battlefield. She worked with desperate intensity, knowing that failure would validate every cruel whisper, every suspicious glance. The dinner had to transcend mere cooking and become undeniable proof of her worthiness. Kane arrived uninvited as the final preparations reached their crescendo. He brought 2 other prominent ranchers, men whose opinions carried weight throughout the territory. Their presence transformed the intimate demonstration into a public trial. "We're here to see what all the fuss is about." The ranchers positioned themselves like judges, their arms crossed and expressions skeptical. They represented the community's collective doubt, the ingrained belief that extraordinary achievement required proper breeding and social position. Celeste's hands trembled as she plated the first course. The familiar motions that usually brought comfort now felt clumsy and uncertain. Every seasoning decision, every garnish placement carried the weight of her entire future. The memory of her grandmother's kitchen flooded back with startling clarity. She was 8 years old again, standing on a wooden crate to reach the cutting board. Grandmother Estelle moved with the grace of a trained chef, her techniques refined through years of service in New Orleans' finest establishments. Cooking is love made visible, child. Never let them tell you that skill has color. Those lessons had been secret treasures, passed down through whispered instruction during stolen evening hours. Grandmother Estelle had learned classical French methods from European chefs before the war changed everything. She taught Celeste that excellence knew no boundaries, that talent could flourish anywhere it was nurtured. The first bite silenced the room completely. Celeste had created a sauce that married her grandmother's Creole traditions with French classical techniques. The flavors built in layers, each element supporting the others in perfect harmony. Kane's expression shifted from smugness to confusion. He had expected amateurish attempts at sophistication, not mastery that rivaled the finest restaurants he had visited in his younger days back east. The main course elevated simple beef into something transcendent. Celeste had transformed tough ranch meat through careful preparation and innovative seasoning. Her technique spoke of training that surpassed anything available in the Arizona territory. Whitmore took careful notes as he ate, documenting each dish with the precision of a professional critic. His earlier enthusiasm had been replaced by serious evaluation, understanding that he was witnessing something genuinely exceptional. Even the skeptical ranchers found themselves reaching for second portions. Their hostility crumbled in the face of undeniable excellence. Food had a way of transcending prejudice, speaking directly to appreciation that bypassed rational thought. Eli watched the transformation with pride and growing dread. Celeste's success made her departure inevitable. She belonged in a world that could properly celebrate her gifts, not hidden away in a frontier kitchen where her talents remained largely unappreciated. The evening ended with grudging acknowledgement from her harshest critics. Cain left without his usual parting threats. The ranchers departed with thoughtful expressions that suggested their fundamental assumptions had been challenged. But victory carried its own burden. Proving her worthiness meant accepting the responsibility that came with exceptional gifts. The morning after her triumphant dinner demonstration, Celeste discovered the first signs of sabotage. Someone had left the kitchen door ajar during the night, allowing desert sand to coat her carefully organized workspace. Flour containers sat open to moisture. Fresh herbs she had cultivated for weeks lay wilted and destroyed. Cain's investigation had intensified beyond casual intimidation. He spent hours at the telegraph office, sending messages to law enforcement contacts across 3 territories. His inquiries focused on uncovering evidence of fraud, convinced that somewhere in Celeste's past lay proof of deception. The marshal's persistence created ripple effects throughout Copper Ridge. Business owners who had begun to soften their stance after her cooking demonstration now retreated behind walls of suspicion. If Cain remained unconvinced, perhaps their initial doubts held merit after all. Eli found himself caught between competing loyalties that threatened to tear him apart. The Cattlemen's Association had made their position clear during an emergency meeting. Supporting Celeste meant risking his standing with every major rancher in the territory. "You're jeopardizing all our relationships for one woman." The association president's words carried the weight of collective judgment. "Think about what your father would say." Those conversations followed Eli home, creating tension that permeated every interaction. He wanted to stand publicly beside Celeste, but decades of social conditioning fought against his instincts. The ranch his father built depended on community cooperation that could evaporate overnight. Meanwhile, Deputy Bradley's behavior became increasingly peculiar. He appeared at odd hours, always carrying his leather-bound notebook. His questions grew more specific, focusing on techniques Celeste used and stories behind particular dishes. "Where did you learn to make that particular sauce?" His pen hovered over the page, ready to capture every detail. "Do you remember the exact ingredients your grandmother used?" The intensity of his interest felt invasive, almost predatory. Celeste began timing her work to avoid his visits, but Bradley seemed to anticipate her schedule with uncanny accuracy. Letters arrived with disturbing frequency. Someone was documenting her daily routines, describing her cooking methods with remarkable precision. The handwriting remained elegant, almost scholarly, but the detailed observations felt like violations of her privacy. The author knew which herbs she preferred for seasoning. They described the exact way she folded omelets. Most disturbing, they referenced conversations she had held in supposedly private moments with Eli. Sleep became elusive as paranoia crept through her thoughts. Someone was watching constantly, recording her movements with methodical dedication. The kitchen that had always been her sanctuary now felt exposed, vulnerable to unseen scrutiny. Whitmore extended his stay indefinitely, claiming professional interest in documenting frontier cuisine for his San Francisco readers. His presence provided some protection against the boldest harassment, but also increased pressure for Celeste to make her final decision. The legal deadline approaches rapidly. Your great-aunt's restaurant cannot remain empty much longer. Each day brought fresh complications that seemed designed to wear down her resolve. Cooking supplies disappeared mysteriously. Equipment suffered damage that appeared accidental, but felt deliberate. Even her private herb garden showed signs of nighttime disturbance. Eli began making discreet inquiries about the sabotage, but his investigation yielded few concrete answers. The perpetrator moved with careful planning, leaving minimal evidence while maximizing disruption to Celeste's preparations. The stress manifested in her cooking. Dishes that once flowed from instinct now required conscious effort. Her hands shook slightly as she worked, betraying the confidence that had always characterized her kitchen presence. The psychological warfare was achieving its intended effect. Kane's telegraph responses began arriving with information that surprised even him. Rather than confirming his suspicions of fraud, the investigations revealed details that complicated his assumptions about Celeste's background. New Orleans restaurant owners remembered her grandmother fondly. Legal records confirmed family connections to prominent chefs from before the war. Even banking institutions verified financial transactions that suggested legitimate inheritance claims. The mounting evidence of Celeste's genuine credentials frustrated Kane's certainty. His investigation was backfiring, creating documentation of her qualifications rather than proof of deception. Bradley's notebook entries became more extensive with each visit. He sketched diagrams of her cooking techniques. He recorded exact measurements and timing sequences. His scholarly approach to documenting her methods suggested purposes beyond casual curiosity. One evening, Celeste confronted him directly about his unusual behavior. "Why are you so interested in my cooking methods, Deputy?" Bradley's response came with practiced casualness that felt rehearsed. "Just appreciate good food, Miss Dupre. Never seen anything quite like your skills out here." But his eyes held secrets that his words carefully avoided. The notebook disappeared quickly into his coat pocket, as if protecting valuable information from unwanted observation. The mysterious letters intensified their frequency and detail. The author now described conversations between Celeste and Eli with word-for-word accuracy. They referenced private moments that no casual observer could have witnessed. Someone with access to the ranch house was conducting surveillance that bordered on obsession. The realization that her privacy had been completely compromised sent chills through Celeste's nights. Eli's internal struggle reached a breaking point when the Cattlemen's Association delivered an ultimatum: support their position against Celeste's inheritance claim or face economic consequences that could destroy his ranch entirely. "This is about maintaining proper order, Hargrave. Let this situation stand, and we'll have every hired hand demanding special treatment." The threat was clear and immediate. Stand with Celeste and lose everything his family had built. Remain silent and watch the woman he loved face her enemies alone. As the deadline for claiming her inheritance approached, all the hidden forces working around Celeste began converging toward an inevitable confrontation. The confrontation erupted on a Tuesday morning when Celeste caught Bradley rifling through her personal belongings in the kitchen storage room. His notebook lay open on the counter, filled with detailed sketches of her cooking techniques and verbatim quotes from private conversations. "What are you doing with my things?" Bradley spun around, his face flushing with the guilt of someone caught in deception. The notebook contained far more than casual observations. Pages of meticulous documentation revealed months of systematic surveillance. "I can explain everything, Miss Dupre." But his explanation shattered every assumption Celeste had made about her mysterious observer. Bradley pulled out a worn press credential from his coat pocket. The document identified him as Thomas Bradley, correspondent for the Eastern Culinary Review. "I'm not really a deputy sheriff. That was my cover for this assignment." The revelation hit Celeste like a physical blow. The man she had trusted with casual conversation had been documenting her life for publication without consent. Every private moment, every vulnerable confession had been recorded for strangers to read. "You've been spying on me for months." Bradley's journalistic instincts warred with unexpected guilt as he saw the hurt in her eyes. His assignment had begun as a simple story about frontier life, but Celeste's extraordinary talents had transformed his article into something much more significant. "Your story deserves to be told. The entire nation needs to know what you've accomplished here." The notebook revealed the scope of his deception. Bradley had documented not only her cooking techniques, but also the community's treatment of her talents. His article would expose the prejudice and small-mindedness that had made her life difficult. Kane arrived at the kitchen as if summoned by instinct for drama. His investigation had finally yielded results that left him stunned and furious. The telegraph responses had revealed Bradley's true identity, along with information that undermined everything Kane believed. Thomas Bradley, journalist from New York City. Real deputy sheriff is tied up in Phoenix. Probably wondering where his badge went. The three of them stood in a triangle of mutual deception exposed. Bradley had posed as law enforcement to gain community trust. Kane had conducted his investigation expecting to find fraud, but discovering legitimacy. Celeste had been living under surveillance without knowledge or consent. "You made a fool of me." Kane's anger focused on Bradley, but his humiliation extended to the entire situation. "Had me investigating an innocent woman while you gathered stories for your newspaper." Bradley's article had already been submitted to his editors in New York. The story would appear in next month's issue, bringing national attention to both Celeste's talents and the community's reaction to her success. The piece focuses on exceptional achievement in unexpected places. Celeste represents something important about American potential. Kane realized his own behavior would be documented for national readers. His investigation, his suspicions, and his attempts to discredit Celeste would be preserved in print for posterity. The humiliation extended beyond personal embarrassment to professional disgrace. Eli arrived as the confrontation reached its peak. The three-way argument had drawn attention from ranch hands and townspeople, who gathered outside the kitchen windows. What should have been a private revelation was becoming public spectacle. "What's all the shouting about?" Kane turned his fury toward Eli with the desperation of a man whose authority had been completely undermined. "Your cook has been the subject of a newspaper investigation. This whole inheritance story is going to be front-page news across the country." The implications sank in gradually. Celeste's story would reach far beyond Copper Ridge, bringing attention to a small frontier town unprepared for national scrutiny. Their community would be judged by readers who had never faced the challenges of frontier life. Bradley attempted damage control as he saw the situation spiraling beyond his intentions. The article presents everyone fairly. I focused on Celeste's achievements, not on community failures. But his reassurances carried little weight with men who felt betrayed by months of deception. Kane had been manipulated into providing quotes and information that would now appear in national publication. Celeste felt violated by the revelation that her most private moments had been recorded for public consumption. The letters she had received contained direct quotes from Bradley's notebook, suggesting he had been sharing his observations with others. "You had no right to make my life into entertainment for strangers." The crowd outside grew larger as word spread through town. People who had ignored Celeste for months now pressed close to witness her moment of crisis. Their sudden interest felt predatory, drawn by drama rather than genuine concern. Whitmore appeared through the gathering crowd, his professional instincts alert to developing news. The food critic had his own agenda for documenting Celeste's story, but his approach had always been transparent about its commercial purposes. The article will bring positive attention to Miss Dupre's talents. National recognition could help her claim her inheritance with confidence. But positive attention came with a price that Celeste was not sure she wanted to pay. Fame would make her a curiosity, a symbol rather than a person. Her cooking would be evaluated through the lens of her unusual circumstances rather than appreciated for its intrinsic quality. Kane faced the collapse of his carefully maintained authority. A fake deputy had operated in his jurisdiction for months without detection. His investigation had been documented and would soon be published as evidence of his prejudice and incompetence. The revelation transformed all their relationships in ways none of them had anticipated. Truth had emerged, but at a cost that would reshape their community forever. Kane's desperation manifested in one final gambit that surprised everyone, including himself. Rather than retreat in humiliation, he doubled down with a public challenge that would either restore his authority or complete his downfall. If Miss Dupre truly deserves this inheritance, let her prove it to the entire community, a cooking competition against our best local cooks. The crowd that had gathered outside the kitchen murmured with interest. A public contest would settle the question of Celeste's abilities once and for all, while giving the community a voice in determining her worthiness. Winner takes all the glory. Loser accepts the judgment of Copper Ridge. Kane's challenge carried implicit threats that everyone understood. Losing would mean more than culinary defeat. It would validate every cruel whisper, every suspicious glance, every attempt to diminish her achievements. Celeste felt the weight of every gaze upon her. Months of persecution had led to this moment where she could either vindicate herself completely or face crushing public rejection. The inheritance deadline loomed just days away. "I accept your challenge." Her voice carried across the assembled crowd with quiet determination. She had spent too many years hiding her talents, too many months enduring doubt and sabotage. The time for compromise had passed. Bradley's journalistic instincts recognized a climactic moment when he saw one. His article would conclude with this dramatic confrontation, giving readers a satisfying resolution to the story he had been documenting. The competition should be judged fairly by neutral parties. Whitmore and 2 visiting cattle buyers agreed to serve as judges. Their lack of local connections would ensure impartial evaluation based purely on culinary merit. The entire town mobilized for the weekend competition. What began as Kane's desperate attempt to regain authority transformed into a community celebration. Local women volunteered their best recipes and cooking skills. Saturday morning dawned clear and hot, perfect weather for an outdoor cooking competition. Tables and stoves were arranged in the town square under the watchful eyes of excited spectators. Celeste faced 3 opponents: the hotel cook, the preacher's wife, and the school teacher who was known for her excellent pies. Each contestant received identical ingredients and cooking equipment. The challenge was to create a complete meal that showcased their highest skills within a 4-hour time limit. Celeste surveyed the available ingredients with the calculating gaze of a master chef. Basic frontier staples could be transformed into something extraordinary through proper technique and creative combination. Her grandmother's training had emphasized making excellence from simplicity. As the competition began, Celeste entered a state of focused calm that blocked out external distractions. The murmuring crowd, the intense heat, and the pressure of public judgment all faded into background noise as she began her preparation. Her opponents worked with competent efficiency, preparing hearty meals that reflected traditional frontier cooking. Their dishes would be satisfying and familiar, exactly what the local community expected from their best cooks. Celeste chose a different path. She began with a sauce that required precise timing and constant attention. The technique came from her grandmother's classical training, but the ingredients were purely local. She was creating fusion cuisine decades before the term existed. Eli watched from the crowd with pride and terror warring in his chest. He had made his decision during the sleepless night before the competition. Win or lose, he would support Celeste publicly and accept whatever consequences followed. "She's going to win." His voice carried clearly across the square. "And when she does, I'm going with her to San Francisco." The declaration shocked the assembled ranchers more than Celeste's cooking techniques. Eli was abandoning his inheritance, his father's legacy, and his position in the community for love. Kane realized his challenge was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of exposing Celeste as a pretender, the competition was showcasing her extraordinary abilities while generating sympathy for her persecution. The aroma from Celeste's station began drawing curious observers. Her techniques created visual drama that entertained the crowd while producing flavors that surpassed anything they had ever experienced. Bradley documented every moment with professional precision, understanding that he was witnessing the climax of an extraordinary story. His article would conclude with triumph rather than tragedy. As the 4-hour deadline approached, all 4 contestants presented their completed meals to the panel of judges. The hotel cook had prepared a solid roast dinner. The preacher's wife offered excellent fried chicken with traditional sides. The school teacher contributed an impressive array of baked goods. Celeste's presentation told a different story entirely. Her fusion of techniques created dishes that elevated familiar ingredients into something transcendent. Each element supported the others in perfect harmony. The judges tasted each meal in respectful silence. Their expressions revealed the contest's outcome before any official announcement. Celeste's mastery was undeniable. The winner, by unanimous decision, is Miss Celeste Dupree. The crowd's response mixed celebration with grudging acknowledgement. Even her harshest critics could not deny the evidence of their own senses. Cain stepped forward with the dignity of a man accepting inevitable defeat. His authority had been undermined, but his humiliation was complete. Rather than fight the outcome, he chose grace in surrender. Miss Dupre has proven her worthiness beyond question. The community owes her an apology. 6 months later, Celeste stood in the kitchen of the Frontier Table, her San Francisco restaurant. The morning newspapers featured glowing reviews that praised her innovative fusion of classical technique with American frontier influences. Eli entered carrying letters from Copper Ridge. The town had embraced its brief moment of national fame, using Bradley's article to attract visitors interested in frontier life. Cain had stepped down as marshal, replaced by Bradley, who had decided to stay permanently. "Do you like eating me?" Celeste asked with a smile, offering Eli a taste of her latest creation. He stepped forward to kiss her neck, their private moment now filled with joy rather than forbidden tension. They had found their place in the world, together.